Question 1. Market research demonstrates that engaging potential clients on social media platforms is crucial for real estate agents in Minnesota. When advertising a property on a platform like Instagram, which approach best balances effective marketing with regulatory compliance under Minnesota law. Option A. Posting a property photo with a caption that mentions the property address, but omits the name of the listing agent and their brokerage firm. Option B. Posting a high-quality photo of the property with a brief, enticing caption and a direct link to the full listing on the brokerage official website, ensuring the licensee's name and brokerage are clearly visible in their profile. Option C. Sharing a visually striking photo of the property with a caption that uses highly aspirational language like dream home and unbeatable opportunity, without providing specific property details or a link to a listing. Option D. Creating a short video tour of the property that highlights only the most attractive features, omitting any mention of potential drawbacks or the property's current status, e.g., under contract. The correct answer is B. Posting a high-quality photo of the property with a brief, enticing caption and a direct link to the full listing on the brokerage's official website, ensuring the licensee's name and brokerage are clearly visible in their profile. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because real estate licensees in Minnesota must balance the powerful reach of digital marketing with strict adherence to advertising regulations designed to protect consumers and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in leveraging social media and online platforms effectively without inadvertently misrepresenting properties, misleading potential buyers or sellers, or failing to disclose essential information, all of which can lead to disciplinary action from the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Careful judgment is required to ensure all marketing efforts are truthful, not misleading, and comply with Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82 and related rules. The best professional practice involves creating social media content that is informative and compliant by clearly identifying the licensee and their brokerage, accurately describing the property's features, and including a direct link to the full listing on the brokerage official website. This approach ensures that all necessary disclosures, such as the property's status, e.g., pending, sold, are readily available to interested parties through the official listing, thereby fulfilling the requirement for accurate and complete representation. It also maintains transparency by clearly associating the advertisement with a licensed professional and their firm. An approach that focuses solely on visually appealing content without providing substantive details or a clear path to more information is professionally unacceptable. This failure to include essential property details or a link to a comprehensive listing can be considered misleading under Minnesota law, as it omits information a reasonable consumer would expect to find. Furthermore, if the social media post implies a level of availability or condition that is not fully detailed in the official listing, it constitutes misrepresentation. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to use vague or exaggerated language to describe the property's benefits without factual substantiation. Minnesota regulations prohibit advertising that is false, fraudulent, or misleading. Hyperbole that crosses the line into factual inaccuracy or creates unrealistic expectations can lead to consumer confusion and potential harm, violating ethical standards and legal requirements. Finally, an approach that fails to clearly identify the individual licensee and their affiliated brokerage in the social media post is also problematic. Minnesota statutes require clear identification of licensed individuals and their firms in all advertising. This omission can lead to confusion about who is responsible for the representation and can hinder consumers from knowing who to contact for legitimate inquiries or complaints, undermining accountability and consumer protection. The professional reasoning process for navigating these situations should involve a proactive review of all digital marketing materials against Minnesota's advertising laws and ethical guidelines. Before publishing any content, licensees should ask, is this truthful and accurate? Does it clearly identify me and my brokerage? Does it provide sufficient information or a clear pathway to it? Does it avoid misleading statements or omissions? This systematic evaluation helps ensure compliance and upholds professional standards. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that real estate markets in Minnesota are influenced by various cycles and trends. A licensed real estate salesperson in Minnesota is advising a client on whether to sell their property in the current market, Which of the following actions best reflects professional and ethical conduct in interpreting and communicating market trends to the client? Option A. Guaranteeing the client that property values will significantly increase in the next 6 months based on a recent uptick in sales volume. Option B. Presenting a comprehensive overview of historical market data, current economic indicators, and expert analyses to illustrate potential market trajectories, while emphasizing that future outcomes are not guaranteed. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the most favorable historical market data that supports a rapid sale, while omitting any information about potential market slowdowns. Option D. Advising the client to delay selling indefinitely, citing only anecdotal evidence of a potential future downturn without supporting data. The correct answer is B. Presenting a comprehensive overview of historical market data, current economic indicators, and expert analyses to illustrate potential market trajectories, while emphasizing that future outcomes are not guaranteed. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that understanding real estate cycles and trends is crucial for licensed real estate professionals in Minnesota. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a licensee must interpret market data and advise clients without making unsubstantiated predictions or engaging in practices that could mislead. The core of the challenge lies in balancing informed guidance with the ethical and regulatory obligation to provide accurate, non-misleading information. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of historical data, current market indicators, and expert forecasts to identify prevailing trends and potential cyclical shifts within the Minnesota real estate market. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Minnesota Department of Commerce's regulations, requiring licensees to act with honesty and integrity, and to avoid misrepresentation. By presenting a balanced view of potential future market conditions based on objective data, the licensee fulfills their duty to inform clients without guaranteeing future outcomes, which is a key ethical consideration. This method emphasizes education and empowers the client to make informed decisions based on a realistic assessment of the market. An incorrect approach would be to confidently predict a specific market outcome, such as a guaranteed price increase or decrease, based on a superficial understanding of current trends. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes misrepresentation and potentially fraudulent activity under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82, which governs real estate practice. Guaranteeing future market performance is speculative and unethical, as it can lead clients to make decisions based on false premises. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss current market trends and solely rely on past performance without considering how current economic factors or demographic shifts might influence future cycles. This failure to adapt analysis to the present context can lead to outdated advice and is a dereliction of the licensee's duty to provide competent service. It fails to acknowledge the dynamic nature of real estate markets and the importance of current data. A further incorrect approach involves selectively presenting data that supports a desired outcome for the licensee or the client, while ignoring contradictory information. This biased presentation of market trends is unethical and violates the principle of fair dealing. It undermines the client's ability to make an objective decision and erodes trust in the licensee. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, ethical considerations, and client education. This involves continuously updating knowledge of market dynamics, understanding the limitations of forecasting, and communicating potential risks and opportunities transparently. The goal is to equip clients with the information they need to navigate the market effectively, rather than to predict or control its future. Question 3. The audit findings indicate that a loan officer in Minnesota has been asked by a close personal friend to expedite the approval of a mortgage loan. The friend, who is a business owner, has provided financial statements that appear to show sufficient income, but the loan officer has some reservations about the long-term stability of the friend's business. The friend has mentioned that if the loan is approved quickly, it will ensure significant future business for the loan officer's institution. What is the most appropriate course of action for the loan officer? Option A. Inform the friend that the loan will be approved as long as they can provide additional documentation that is not typically required for similar loans, to create a paper trail of due diligence. Option B. Approve the loan quickly to secure the promised future business, while making a note in the file that the decision was influenced by the potential for ongoing client relationships. Option C. Decline the loan application outright due to the perceived instability of the friend's business, without thoroughly reviewing all provided financial documentation or considering alternative loan products. Option D. Objectively evaluate the loan application based on the borrower's financial qualifications and the lender's established underwriting criteria, documenting all findings and the rationale for the final decision, regardless of the personal relationship or the promise of future business. The correct answer is D. Objectively evaluate the loan application based on the borrower's financial qualifications and the lender's established underwriting criteria, documenting all findings and the rationale for the final decision, regardless of the personal relationship or the promise of future business. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest and a violation of ethical lending practices, making this scenario professionally challenging. The loan officer is being pressured to approve a loan for a close associate despite concerns about the borrower's financial stability. This requires careful judgment to uphold professional integrity and regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a thorough and objective evaluation of the loan application based solely on the borrower's financial qualifications and the lender's established underwriting criteria, without regard to the personal relationship. This upholds the principle of fair lending and ensures that loan decisions are made on merit, protecting both the lender and the borrower from undue risk. Adhering strictly to Minnesota's lending regulations and the lender's internal policies, which mandate objective underwriting, is paramount. This approach prevents potential conflicts of interest and ensures that the loan approval process is transparent and equitable. Approving the loan based on the personal relationship, even with a vague promise of future business, is ethically unsound and violates principles of fair lending. It circumvents the established underwriting process and introduces an unacceptable level of risk for the lender. This action could be construed as preferential treatment, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny and penalties under Minnesota law for non-compliance with fair lending practices. Another unacceptable approach is to delay the decision indefinitely, or to stall the process without a legitimate reason. This can be seen as an attempt to avoid making a difficult decision while still potentially favoring the associate. Such an action can also lead to missed opportunities for the borrower and can be perceived as unprofessional and lacking in transparency, potentially damaging the lender's reputation. Finally, attempting to manipulate the underwriting criteria or overlook significant financial deficiencies to accommodate the associate is a serious ethical breach and a direct violation of lending regulations. This constitutes fraudulent activity and can result in severe legal consequences for both the loan officer and the borrower, as well as significant reputational damage to the financial institution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objectivity, adherence to regulations, and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, a potential conflict of interest and pressure to deviate from standard procedures. 2. Consulting relevant policies and regulations, reviewing Minnesota lending laws and the institution's internal underwriting guidelines. 3. Seeking guidance. If unsure, consulting with a supervisor or compliance officer. 4. Documenting all decisions and communications, maintaining a clear record of the evaluation process and the rationale for the final decision. 5. Acting with integrity, making decisions based on objective criteria and the best interests of all parties involved, including the lender. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a seller in Minnesota is insistent on using a valuation method that focuses on the potential income the property could generate, believing this will best reflect its worth. As a licensed real estate professional in Minnesota, which valuation method should you prioritize explaining as the most relevant for a typical single-family home, and why is this approach generally preferred for such properties? Option A. A combination of all three approaches, regardless of property type or market conditions. Option B. Cost approach, as it determines the expense of rebuilding the property. Option C. Income approach, as it quantifies the property's potential to generate revenue. Option D. Comparative market analysis, as it directly reflects current market conditions and buyer behavior for similar properties. The correct answer is D. Comparative market analysis, as it directly reflects current market conditions and buyer behavior for similar properties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because a seller is requesting a valuation method that is not the most appropriate for their specific property type and market conditions. A real estate licensee in Minnesota has a fiduciary duty to their client, which includes providing competent service and advice. This requires understanding the strengths and limitations of different valuation methods and recommending the most suitable one, even if it's not what the client initially requests. Misrepresenting the applicability or effectiveness of a valuation method can lead to client dissatisfaction, potential legal issues, and damage to the licensee's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis. This method is best suited for residential properties, which are typically the focus of individual sellers. It involves analyzing recent sales of similar properties in the same geographic area, adjusting for differences in features, condition, and location. Minnesota real estate regulations, like those in most jurisdictions, emphasize providing accurate and relevant information to clients. The Minnesota Department of Commerce, which oversees real estate licensing, expects licensees to act in the best interests of their clients and to possess the knowledge to perform necessary services competently. Using a CMA aligns with this expectation by providing a market-based valuation that is directly relevant to the property's salability in the current local market. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the income approach would be inappropriate for a typical residential seller. This method is primarily used for income-producing properties like apartment buildings or commercial spaces, where the value is derived from the potential rental income. Applying it to a single-family home without a rental history or investment intent would be misleading and not reflect the property's true market value to an owner-occupant buyer. Similarly, the cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace the property, is generally best suited for unique or new construction properties where comparable sales are scarce. For a standard residential property, it often overestimates value by not adequately accounting for depreciation or market demand, and it doesn't directly reflect what a buyer is willing to pay in the current market. Using these methods without proper justification or explanation to the seller would violate the duty of competence and potentially mislead the client about their property's value. Professional reasoning. When faced with a client's request for a specific valuation method, a Minnesota real estate licensee should first understand the client's objective and the nature of the property. They should then assess which valuation method, are most appropriate for that property type and market. If the client's requested method is not the most suitable, the licensee has a professional obligation to explain why, educate the client on the more appropriate methods, and recommend the best course of action. This involves clear communication, demonstrating expertise, and prioritizing the client's best interests, as mandated by ethical standards and regulatory requirements for licensees in Minnesota. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that a real estate salesperson in Minnesota is representing a client who owns a property featuring a substantial farmhouse, several outbuildings, and 100 acres of actively cultivated land. The client occasionally rents out a small portion of the farmhouse for short-term vacation stays. The salesperson needs to determine the most accurate classification for marketing purposes, which approach best aligns with professional standards and Minnesota real estate regulations. Option A. Classify the property based on the client's desire to market it to a broader range of potential buyers, even if it means emphasizing secondary features. Option B. Classify the property based on its predominant use and physical characteristics, considering zoning and the primary economic activity associated with the land. Option C. Classify the property primarily as residential due to the presence of a farmhouse and the occasional short-term rental income. Option D. Classify the property based on the most recent or highest offer received, regardless of its actual type. The correct answer is B. Classify the property based on its predominant use and physical characteristics, considering zoning and the primary economic activity associated with the land. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate salesperson in Minnesota to accurately identify the primary classification of a property for a client, which directly impacts marketing strategies, potential buyer pools, and regulatory compliance. Misclassifying the property can lead to wasted marketing efforts, legal complications, and damage to the salesperson's reputation and brokerage. Careful judgment is required to ensure the client's best interests are served by understanding the property's predominant use and characteristics, as defined by Minnesota real estate law and common practice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the property's predominant use and characteristics, considering factors such as zoning, physical attributes, and intended purpose, to determine its primary classification under Minnesota real estate law. This approach ensures that the property is marketed accurately to the most relevant audience and complies with all applicable regulations. For example, if a property has both residential and agricultural elements, but its primary function and zoning are agricultural, it should be classified and marketed as such. This aligns with the Minnesota Department of Commerce's guidance on property classifications and ethical practice standards for licensees. Incorrect approaches analysis. Marketing a property solely based on a secondary feature without considering its predominant use is professionally unacceptable. For instance, listing a property with a large barn and acreage primarily as a residential property, despite its agricultural zoning and primary use for farming, misrepresents the property's true nature and will likely attract unqualified buyers. Similarly, classifying a property based on the client's personal preference rather than its objective characteristics and legal classification is unethical and can lead to misrepresentation. Focusing only on the most profitable marketing angle without regard for accurate classification also violates professional duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to property classification. This involves understanding the definitions and distinctions between residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties as recognized in Minnesota. Key considerations include zoning ordinances, the physical nature of the property, its current use, and its potential uses. When in doubt, consulting with local planning and zoning departments or experienced colleagues can provide clarity. The ultimate goal is to provide accurate information to clients and potential buyers, ensuring transparency and compliance with all legal and ethical obligations. Question 6. Analysis of the current economic climate in Minnesota, including rising interest rates and a tightening inventory of homes, leads a real estate salesperson to believe that a seller's desired listing price is significantly above the current market value. What is the most professional and ethically sound approach for the salesperson to take in advising their seller client? Option A. Focus solely on the seller's emotional attachment to the property and assure them that its unique features will command the desired price, regardless of market conditions. Option B. Present a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes current economic data and recent comparable sales, explaining how these factors influence pricing, and then collaboratively discuss pricing strategies with the seller. Option C. Immediately advise the seller that their desired price is unrealistic and strongly recommend a substantially lower listing price to ensure a quick sale. Option D. Agree to list the property at the seller's desired price, but subtly encourage buyers to submit lower offers, hoping the market will correct the initial overpricing. Correct answer is B. Present a detailed comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes current economic data and recent comparable sales, explaining how these factors influence pricing, and then collaboratively discuss pricing strategies with the seller. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate salesperson must balance their fiduciary duty to their client with the broader economic realities of the local market. Misinterpreting or ignoring these economic factors can lead to unrealistic client expectations, failed transactions, and potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to provide accurate, informed advice that aligns with both client goals and market conditions. The best professional approach involves a thorough analysis of current and projected economic indicators relevant to the Minnesota real estate market. This includes examining local employment trends, interest rate movements, inventory levels, and recent sales data. By synthesizing this information, the salesperson can provide their seller client with a realistic assessment of market value and potential selling timelines. This approach is correct because Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82, the Real Estate Boss License Act, mandates that licensees act honestly and truthfully and provide competent service. Providing advice grounded in economic realities fulfills this duty by ensuring the client is making informed decisions based on objective data, rather than speculation or wishful thinking. This proactive and data-driven strategy upholds the licensee's obligation to act in the client's best interest by managing expectations and guiding them toward a successful sale. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the seller's desired price without any market validation. This fails to meet the licensee's obligation to provide competent and honest advice. It can lead to the property being overpriced, remaining on the market for an extended period, and ultimately selling for less than it might have if priced correctly from the outset. Ethically, this approach prioritizes the seller's immediate emotional desire over the objective reality of the market, potentially causing financial detriment to the client. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the seller's concerns about market conditions and immediately push for a lower price without a detailed explanation of the economic factors influencing that recommendation. While the advice might be market-aligned, the failure to empathetically address the seller's perspective and educate them on the underlying economic reasons can erode trust and create an adversarial relationship. This can be seen as a failure to communicate effectively and to fully represent the client's interests by not taking the time to build consensus and understanding. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to promise a quick sale at the seller's desired price, regardless of market evidence. This is a direct violation of the duty to be truthful and honest. It sets unrealistic expectations and is a form of misrepresentation, which is strictly prohibited by Minnesota real estate regulations. Such a promise is not only unethical, but also exposes the licensee to potential disciplinary action and legal liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive market analysis, incorporating relevant economic factors specific to the Minnesota locale. The licensee must then communicate these findings clearly and empathetically to the client, explaining the rationale behind any pricing or strategy recommendations. This process ensures that advice is both ethically sound and grounded in objective market realities, fostering trust and leading to more successful outcomes. Question 7. The review process indicates that a Minnesota real estate salesperson is approaching their license renewal date. They have not yet completed their required continuing education hours for the current licensing period. What is the most responsible and compliant course of action for this salesperson? Option A. Complete any real estate-related courses that seem relevant, assuming they will be accepted for continuing education credit by the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Option B. Immediately identify and enroll in Minnesota Department of Commerce-approved continuing education courses that fulfill the remaining requirements, ensuring completion well before the renewal deadline. Option C. Wait until the week before the renewal deadline to find and complete any available continuing education courses to meet the minimum requirements. Option D. Rely on the Minnesota Department of Commerce to send a final reminder, and then complete the required continuing education hours shortly after receiving it. Correct answer is B. Immediately identify and enroll in Minnesota Department of Commerce-approved continuing education courses that fulfill the remaining requirements, ensuring completion well before the renewal deadline. Explanation. The review process indicates a common challenge faced by real estate professionals in Minnesota, maintaining compliance with licensing and continuing education requirements. This scenario is professionally challenging because a lapse in these requirements can have significant consequences, including license suspension or revocation, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all obligations are met proactively. The best approach involves proactively tracking and fulfilling all continuing education requirements well in advance of renewal deadlines. This includes identifying approved courses that meet Minnesota's specific requirements for real estate licensees, such as those mandated by the Minnesota Department of Commerce. By completing these courses early, a licensee ensures they have ample time to address any unforeseen issues, such as course availability or administrative errors, and can confidently submit their renewal application on time. This proactive stance aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain professional competence and adhere to all legal and regulatory mandates governing the practice of real estate in Minnesota. An incorrect approach involves waiting until the last minute to complete continuing education hours. This creates a high risk of missing the renewal deadline due to last-minute course scheduling conflicts, unexpected personal emergencies, or administrative delays in course completion reporting. This failure to plan demonstrates a lack of diligence and can lead to a lapse in licensure, rendering the individual unable to legally practice real estate in Minnesota. Another incorrect approach is to assume that all real estate courses are automatically approved for continuing education credit in Minnesota, without verifying that a specific course is approved by the Minnesota Department of Commerce and meets the specific content requirements for real estate licensees. A professional risks completing courses that will not count towards their renewal obligations. This can result in a shortfall of required hours and a failure to renew the license on time, leading to the same consequences as waiting until the last minute. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal reminders or the assumption that the licensing body will automatically notify them of upcoming deadlines and requirements. While licensing bodies do provide information, the ultimate responsibility for tracking renewal dates and fulfilling continuing education obligations rests with the individual licensee. Failure to actively manage these responsibilities can lead to unintentional noncompliance. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to managing their license and continuing education. This involves creating a personal renewal calendar, researching and selecting approved continuing education courses well in advance, keeping meticulous records of completed courses, and submitting renewal applications with sufficient time for processing. Regularly reviewing the Minnesota Department of Commerce's website for any updates to licensing or continuing education regulations is also a crucial part of professional diligence. Question 8. Performance analysis shows that a real estate licensee in Minnesota is working with a prospective buyer who expresses a strong preference for living in a neighborhood with a high concentration of people of their specific religious faith, and explicitly asks the licensee to only show them properties in such areas. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the licensee? Option A. Politely decline the discriminatory request and explain that showing properties based on religious affiliation is illegal under Minnesota's Fair Housing Act, offering to show properties based on objective criteria. Option B. Agree to the buyer's request and exclusively show properties in neighborhoods that align with their stated religious preference. Option C. Advise the buyer that finding a neighborhood with a similar religious demographic is a good idea and focus the search accordingly. Option D. Refuse to work with the prospective buyer altogether due to their discriminatory request. The correct answer is A. Politely decline the discriminatory request and explain that showing properties based on religious affiliation is illegal under Minnesota's Fair Housing Act, offering to show properties based on objective criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a delicate situation involving a potential client's personal beliefs and a protected class under fair housing laws. The challenge lies in balancing the licensee's duty to their client with their legal and ethical obligations to uphold fair housing principles. Missteps can lead to significant legal repercussion, damage to reputation, and harm to individuals seeking housing. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant and ethical. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves politely but firmly declining to engage in any discriminatory practices and educating the client on their legal obligations under Minnesota's Fair Housing Act. This approach directly addresses the client's discriminatory request by refusing to act upon it, and simultaneously fulfills the licensee's duty to uphold the law. It involves clearly stating that the licensee cannot and will not participate in any activity that violates fair housing laws, which prohibit discrimination based on protected characteristics such as religion. This proactive stance prevents potential violations and reinforces the licensee's commitment to ethical conduct. Incorrect approaches analysis. Refusing to show properties to the client because of their stated religious beliefs without further engagement or education could be perceived as discriminatory itself and is not the most constructive approach. It avoids direct participation in discrimination. It doesn't address the underlying issue or educate the client. Suggesting that the client look for housing in a neighborhood predominantly populated by people of their own religion, even if framed as helpful advice, facilitates segregation and is a form of steering, which is a violation of fair housing laws. This approach actively contributes to discriminatory housing patterns. Agreeing to the client's request and only showing properties in specific areas based on religious affiliation, while appearing to accommodate the client, is a direct violation of Minnesota's Fair Housing Act. This constitutes illegal steering and discrimination based on religion, a protected class. Professional reasoning. professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. And faced with a request that potentially violates fair housing laws, the first step is to recognize the protected class involved and the relevant legislation, in this case, Minnesota's Fair Housing Act. The next step is to refuse to comply with the discriminatory request. Crucially, the professional should then educate the client about the illegality and ethical unacceptability of their request, explaining the protections afforded to all individuals under fair housing laws. This approach ensures both compliance and promotes understanding of fair housing principles. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that a Minnesota real estate salesperson is working with a first-time homebuyer who has expressed interest in exploring various financing options, including those that might offer more lenient qualification criteria. The salesperson is aware of FHA, VA, and USDA loans, but is unsure how to best assist the client without overstepping their licensing boundaries. Which of the following approaches best balances client education with regulatory compliance? Option A. Advise the client that FHA, VA, and USDA loans are generally too complex for first-time homebuyers and suggest they focus on conventional financing options instead. Option B. Provide the client with a detailed explanation of the specific eligibility requirements, typical interest rates, and the step-by-step application process for FHA, VA, and USDA loans, as these are common financing methods. Option C. Recommend a specific mortgage broker who the salesperson knows handles FHA, VA, and USDA loans, assuring the client that this broker will provide the best service for these programs. Option D. Inform the client that FHA, VA, and USDA loans are government-backed programs that may offer alternative financing solutions, and strongly advise them to consult with a mortgage lender or loan officer specializing in these types of loans for detailed information and application assistance. Correct answer is D. Inform the client that FHA, VA, and USDA loans are government-backed programs that may offer alternative financing solutions, and strongly advise them to consult with a mortgage lender or loan officer specializing in these types of loans for detailed information and application assistance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Minnesota to navigate the complexities of government-backed loan programs while ensuring compliance with Minnesota's specific real estate licensing laws and ethical obligations. The salesperson must balance assisting clients with understanding these loan options against the risk of providing advice that exceeds their licensing scope or misrepresents the nature of these programs, potentially leading to financial harm for the client and regulatory action against the licensee. Careful judgment is required to identify the appropriate level of information and guidance to provide. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and accurately informing the client about the existence and general purpose of FHA, VA, and USDA loans as potential financing options. This approach correctly focuses on educating the client about the availability of these programs and advising them to consult with a qualified mortgage professional or lender who specializes in these government-backed loans. This aligns with Minnesota's real estate licensing regulations, which permit licensees to discuss general financing options, but prohibit them from providing specific financial or loan advice, which falls under the purview of licensed loan originators. Ethically, this approach prioritizes client well-being by directing them to the appropriate experts for detailed information and application processes, thereby avoiding the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering or financial advising. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves detailing the specific eligibility requirements, interest rates, and application procedures for FHA, VA, and USDA loans. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes providing specific loan advice, which is outside the scope of a Minnesota real estate salesperson's license. Such actions could be construed as the unauthorized practice of mortgage brokering or financial advising, violating Minnesota statutes related to loan origination and potentially leading to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss these loan programs entirely, stating they are too complicated or not worth pursuing. This is professionally unsound as it fails to act in the client's best interest by withholding potentially beneficial financing options. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and could be seen as a failure to provide adequate service, potentially violating ethical duties to represent the client competently and to the best of their ability. A further incorrect approach is to recommend a specific lender or broker for these government-backed loans without a clear understanding of their expertise, or without disclosing any potential referral fees, if applicable and permitted by Minnesota law. This could create a conflict of interest or lead the client to believe the salesperson is endorsing a particular service provider over others, potentially violating disclosure requirements and ethical obligations to remain neutral and objective. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Minnesota should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education about available options while strictly adhering to the boundaries of their real estate license. This involves understanding what constitutes general information versus specific advice. When discussing financing, the focus should be on empowering the client to seek expert guidance from licensed professionals in the mortgage industry. A key step is to identify the client's potential needs and then direct them to the appropriate resources, rather than attempting to provide that expertise themselves. This ensures compliance, protects the client, and upholds the integrity of the real estate profession. Question 10. Investigation of a potential home purchase in Minneapolis, Minnesota, reveals that the buyer intends to make a 10% down payment on a $300,000 home. The lender has indicated that private mortgage insurance, PMI, will be required and has provided an estimated annual PMI rate of 0.75% of the loan amount. The buyer is seeking to understand the estimated monthly cost of this PMI. What is the estimated monthly cost of the PMI for this buyer? Option A. The estimated monthly PMI cost is $131.25. Option B. The estimated monthly PMI cost is $175.00. Option C. The estimated monthly PMI cost is $225.00. Option D. The estimated monthly PMI cost is $157.50. Correct answer is D. The estimated monthly PMI cost is $157.50. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Minnesota real estate salesperson because it requires a nuanced understanding of private mortgage insurance, PMI, requirements, and the ability to accurately calculate its cost for a client. Miscalculating PMI can lead to significant financial implications for the buyer, potentially impacting their ability to afford the home or causing them to overpay for their mortgage. It also reflects poorly on the salesperson's competence and fiduciary duty to their client. Adherence to Minnesota's specific real estate regulations and general ethical principles of client representation is paramount. The best approach involves accurately calculating the annual PMI premium based on the loan-to-value ratio and the lender's specific PMI rate, then prorating that cost over the expected duration of the PMI requirement. This is correct because it directly addresses the client's need for precise financial information regarding their home purchase. Minnesota real estate law, while not dictating specific PMI calculation formulas, mandates that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients. Providing an accurate estimate of PMI, which is a direct cost associated with the mortgage, fulfills this duty. The calculation should reflect the standard practice of determining the annual premium and then presenting it in a way that is understandable to the client, often as a monthly cost. An incorrect approach would be to simply state that PMI is required without providing any quantitative estimate, leaving the client uninformed about a significant financial obligation. This fails the duty of providing accurate and complete information. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate PMI based on a generic percentage without considering the specific loan terms or the lender's underwriting, which could lead to a misleadingly low or high figure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could result in the client making financial decisions based on faulty information, violating the principle of acting in the client's best interest. Finally, an approach that inflates the PMI cost to appear more conservative is also unethical, as it misrepresents a financial fact and could deter a client from a purchase unnecessarily. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's specific loan scenario, including the down payment amount and the anticipated loan principal. They should then consult with the lender or a mortgage broker to obtain the specific PMI rate applicable to the borrower's credit profile and loan terms. Using this information, they can calculate the annual PMI premium and then present it to the client in a clear and understandable manner, often by dividing the annual premium by 12 to show the monthly impact. This systematic process ensures accuracy and upholds the salesperson's ethical and legal obligations. Question 11. Comparative studies suggest that real estate licensees in Minnesota often face challenges in clearly differentiating property ownership types for their clients. A married couple is purchasing a property together and expresses a desire for both of them to own the property equally, with the understanding that if one passes away, their share will automatically pass to the surviving spouse without the need for probate. Based on Minnesota property law and ethical considerations for licensees, which of the following approaches best guides the couple toward their stated objectives? Option A. Advise the couple that since they are married, their ownership will automatically be considered joint tenancy with the right of survivorship, and that this is the standard for all married couples purchasing property in Minnesota. Option B. Inform the couple that any form of co-ownership, including tenancy in common, will inherently include the right of survivorship, and that they do not need to specify this in the deed. Option C. Explain the concept of fee simple ownership, and then discuss how joint tenancy with the right of survivorship, as recognized under Minnesota law, can fulfill their desire for equal ownership and automatic inheritance, while advising them to consult an attorney to ensure the deed is properly drafted to reflect this intent. Option D. Explain that a leasehold interest would allow them to occupy the property together for their lifetimes, and that upon the death of one spouse, the leasehold would automatically transfer to the survivor. The correct answer is C. Explain the concept of fee simple ownership, and then discuss how joint tenancy with the right of survivorship, as recognized under Minnesota law, can fulfill their desire for equal ownership and automatic inheritance, while advising them to consult an attorney to ensure the deed is properly drafted to reflect this intent. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Minnesota to accurately advise clients on the nuances of property ownership, which directly impacts their rights, responsibilities, and future disposition of the property. Misunderstanding or misrepresenting these distinctions can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for clients, and disciplinary action against the licensee. Careful judgment is required to ensure clients make informed decisions based on their specific circumstances and goals. The correct approach involves accurately identifying and explaining the fundamental differences between fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common, and then guiding the client to select the ownership type that best aligns with their stated intentions and legal requirements under Minnesota law. Specifically, understanding that fee simple represents the most complete form of ownership, leasehold involves a right to occupy for a defined term. Joint tenancy includes the right of survivorship, and tenancy in common allows for individual ownership shares and inheritance. A licensee must be able to articulate these distinctions clearly and without offering legal advice, empowering the client to consult with legal counsel for final determination. This aligns with Minnesota Statutes Chapter 500, which governs estates in real property, and ethical guidelines requiring licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, avoiding misrepresentation and providing accurate information. An incorrect approach would be to assume that all co-owners automatically hold property as joint tenants with right of survivorship, without confirming the intent of the parties or the proper legal documentation. This fails to recognize that in Minnesota, without explicit language indicating a joint tenancy, property conveyed to two or more persons is presumed to be a tenancy in common, as per Minnesota Statute Section 519. Another incorrect approach is to advise a client that a leasehold interest is equivalent to full ownership, neglecting the critical distinction that leasehold is a possessory right for a limited duration, not an ownership interest. Furthermore, conflating joint tenancy with tenancy in common by suggesting that all forms of co-ownership inherently include the right of survivorship is a significant error, as the right of survivorship is a specific characteristic of joint tenancy that must be clearly established. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's objectives and concerns regarding property acquisition or ownership. Second, possess a thorough understanding of the various forms of property ownership recognized in Minnesota. Third, clearly and accurately explain the characteristics, rights, and implications of each ownership type, using plain language and avoiding legal jargon where possible. Fourth, Emphasize that the licensee is providing information about property ownership types and not legal advice, strongly recommending that clients consult with a qualified attorney to determine the most appropriate ownership structure for their specific situation, and to ensure proper legal documentation. Question 12. The investigation demonstrates that a Minnesota real estate salesperson is assisting a client who is seeking alternative financing for a property purchase, specifically inquiring about hard money loans and seller financing. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the salesperson? Option A. Provide the client with general information about the typical characteristics, potential advantages, and significant risks of hard money loans and seller financing, while strongly advising them to consult with independent legal and financial professionals for specific advice and review of any agreements. Option B. Actively negotiate the terms of a hard money loan on behalf of the client, including interest rates and repayment periods, and assist in drafting the seller financing documents. Option C. Minimize the risks associated with hard money loans and seller financing, assuring the client that these options are generally simpler and less risky than traditional mortgages. Option D. Recommend a specific hard money lender or a particular seller financing arrangement to the client, without disclosing any potential referral fees or conflicts of interest. The correct answer is A. Provide the client with general information about the typical characteristics, potential advantages, and significant risks of hard money loans and seller financing, while strongly advising them to consult with independent legal and financial professionals for specific advice and review of any agreements. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a real estate salesperson in Minnesota is assisting a client who is exploring financing options beyond traditional mortgages. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the salesperson to navigate complex financial instruments like hard money loans and seller financing, which carry different risks and regulatory considerations than conventional loans. The salesperson must ensure they are providing accurate, compliant information without engaging in unlicensed lending activities or misrepresenting the terms and risks involved. Careful judgment is required to balance the client's needs with legal and ethical obligations under Minnesota law. The best professional approach involves thoroughly educating the client about the general characteristics, potential benefits, and significant risks associated with hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing that these are alternative financing methods. The salesperson should clearly advise the client to seek independent legal and financial counsel, to review any specific loan agreements, and to fully understand their obligations and protections. This approach is correct because it aligns with Minnesota's regulatory framework for real estate professionals, which prohibits them from providing financial advice or acting as lenders unless properly licensed. By focusing on education and referral to qualified professionals, the salesperson avoids unauthorized practice of law or finance and upholds their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest by ensuring they make informed decisions with expert guidance. An incorrect approach would be to actively negotiate the terms of a hard money loan on behalf of the client, including interest rates and repayment schedules, or to draft seller financing documents. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes the unlicensed practice of mortgage brokering or lending, which is strictly regulated in Minnesota. Such actions could expose the salesperson and their brokerage to significant legal penalties and disciplinary actions by the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Another incorrect approach would be to recommend a specific hard money lender or a particular seller financing structure without disclosing any potential referral fees or conflicts of interest. This is ethically problematic and potentially violates disclosure requirements. Even without direct financial gain, steering a client towards a specific product or service without full transparency can be seen as a conflict of interest and a failure to provide objective advice. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to downplay the risks associated with hard money loans, such as higher interest rates and shorter repayment terms, or to assure the client that seller financing is always a simpler and less risky option than traditional mortgages. This misrepresentation of material facts is a violation of ethical standards and could lead to significant financial harm for the client, exposing the salesperson to liability. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the client's financial goals and constraints. They should then focus on providing general information about available financing options, clearly delineating the differences between conventional and alternative financing. Crucially, they must always advise clients to consult with independent legal and financial professionals for personalized advice and to review any specific agreements. This decision-making framework prioritizes client protection, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. Question 13. In Minnesota, a loan originator is working with a client on a mortgage application. To expedite the process and secure the client's business, the originator considers several approaches to providing the required disclosures. Which approach best aligns with Minnesota's mortgage lending regulations and ethical best practices for the mortgage application process? Option A. Immediately provide the borrower with a loan estimate within 3 business days of receiving the application, along with other initial required disclosures, regardless of the borrower's immediate commitment to a specific loan product. Option B. Offer a brief summary of loan features verbally and state that all official documents will be available for review at the closing appointment. Option C. Wait until the final stages of the loan process, just before the closing appointment, to present all disclosure documents, including the loan estimate and closing disclosure, for the borrower's signature. Option D. Provide the borrower with a verbal overview of potential loan terms and costs, and only furnish the written loan estimate once the borrower has verbally agreed to proceed with a specific loan product. The correct answer is A. Immediately provide the borrower with a loan estimate within 3 business days of receiving the application, along with other initial required disclosures, regardless of the borrower's immediate commitment to a specific loan product. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in the mortgage application process where a loan originator must balance the need for efficient client service with strict adherence to Minnesota's mortgage lending regulations and ethical obligations. The pressure to close loans quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the application or violate consumer protection laws. Ensuring all required disclosures are provided accurately and in a timely manner is paramount to protecting the borrower and maintaining compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively providing the borrower with all legally mandated disclosures, including the loan estimate, within the time frame specified by the Loan Originator Compensation Rule and other relevant Minnesota statutes. This approach ensures the borrower has the necessary information to make an informed decision about their mortgage options. It demonstrates transparency and a commitment to regulatory compliance, building trust and mitigating the risk of future disputes or legal challenges. This proactive disclosure is a cornerstone of ethical lending and a requirement under federal and state mortgage regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Delaying the provision of the loan estimate until the borrower has committed to a specific loan product, or only providing it upon explicit request, violates the federal Loan Originator Compensation Rule and potentially Minnesota's consumer protection laws. This practice deprives the borrower of crucial comparative information early in the process, hindering their ability to shop for the best terms. It can be seen as an attempt to steer borrowers towards a particular product without full disclosure. Providing only a verbal overview of loan terms without the written loan estimate is also a significant regulatory failure. While verbal communication is important, it does not satisfy the legal requirement for written disclosures. This approach lacks the necessary documentation and can lead to misunderstandings and disputes about what was communicated. It fails to provide the borrower with a tangible record of the loan terms. Waiting until the closing to provide all disclosure documents, including the closing disclosure, is a severe violation. The closing disclosure is intended to provide borrowers with a final review of their loan terms and costs before they are legally obligated. Presenting it for the first time at closing prevents the borrower from having the legally mandated 3-business-day review period, undermining the purpose of the disclosure and violating federal regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric and compliance-first mindset. This involves understanding the entire mortgage application process from a regulatory perspective, identifying all mandatory disclosures and their timing requirements under Minnesota law and federal regulations applicable in Minnesota. When faced with time pressures, professionals must prioritize adherence to these rules, recognizing that compliance is not an obstacle but a fundamental aspect of responsible lending. A robust internal process that automates or flags disclosure requirements at each stage of the application is crucial. If unsure about specific timing or disclosure content, Consulting with compliance officers or legal counsel is the appropriate professional step. Question 14. The efficiency study reveals that Minnesota real estate salespersons need to enhance their methods for presenting investment opportunities. When discussing real estate investment trusts, rate with a prospective client, which of the following methods best aligns with Minnesota's regulatory framework and ethical standards for real estate professionals? Option A. Presenting rate as a direct substitute for owning physical rental properties, focusing on the passive income aspect without mentioning the differences in management, liquidity, or the impact of broader economic factors on their value. Option B. Providing a balanced overview that explains rate or securities, detailing their potential for income and appreciation, while also clearly outlining the associated market risks, liquidity considerations, and tax implications, consistent with Minnesota statutes Chapter 80A and Chapter 82. Option C. Emphasizing the historical high dividend yields and potential for rapid capital appreciation of a specific rate, while downplaying the fact that rate are traded on stock exchanges and subject to market volatility. Option D. Highlighting only the tax benefits of investing in rate, such as pass-through income, without discussing the underlying investment risks, the nature of rate as securities, or the potential for principal loss. The correct answer is B. Providing a balanced overview that explains rate are securities, detailing their potential for income and appreciation, while also clearly outlining the associated market risks, liquidity considerations, and tax implications, consistent with Minnesota statutes Chapter 80A and Chapter 82. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to optimize how real estate agents in Minnesota present investment opportunities to clients. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires agents to balance promoting potentially lucrative investments with their fiduciary duties and the specific disclosure requirements mandated by Minnesota law and the Real Estate Investment Trust, REIT, industry. Misrepresenting or omitting crucial information about REIT can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including license suspension or revocation. The best approach involves providing a comprehensive and balanced overview of REIT, emphasizing both their potential benefits and inherent risks, while strictly adhering to Minnesota's disclosure regulations for securities and real estate transactions. This includes clearly explaining that rate are securities, not traditional real estate, and that their value can fluctuate based on market conditions and the performance of their underlying assets. Agents must ensure clients understand the liquidity differences compared to direct property ownership and the potential for dividend taxation. This aligns with Minnesota statutes Chapter 80A, Securities Act, and Chapter 82, Real Estate Brokers and Salespersons, which require full and fair disclosure of all material facts and prohibit misrepresentation or concealment. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the historical appreciation and dividend yields of a specific rate without adequately disclosing its nature as a security, the associated market risks, or the potential for capital loss. This failure to disclose the security aspect and market volatility violates Minnesota's securities laws, which mandate that all investment offerings be presented with full transparency regarding their risks. Another incorrect approach would be to present rate as a guaranteed passive income stream, akin to rental property income, without explaining the differences in management, liquidity, and the fact that rate performance is tied to stock market fluctuations. This mischaracterization creates unrealistic expectations and omits critical information about the investment's true nature, potentially misleading clients and violating ethical obligations to provide accurate advice. Furthermore, an approach that highlights only the tax advantages of rate without a balanced discussion of the underlying investment risks and the fact that these are publicly traded securities is also professionally unacceptable. This selective disclosure can lead clients to make investment decisions based on incomplete information, contravening the principles of informed consent and fair dealing required by Minnesota real estate and securities regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and full disclosure. This involves understanding the specific regulatory landscape for both real estate and securities in Minnesota, thoroughly researching any investment product being presented, and always erring on the side of providing more information rather than less. Agents should consider themselves advisors who must equip clients with all necessary facts to make an informed decision, rather than mere salespeople pushing a product. Question 15. Regulatory review indicates that a real estate broker in Minnesota is responsible for supervising all licensed agents working under their brokerage. Considering the potential for violations of Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82, what is the most effective and compliant approach for a broker to ensure proper agent supervision? Option A. Only address potential supervisory issues when a client files a formal complaint against an agent. Option B. Delegate all supervisory tasks to an unlicensed administrative assistant to manage the day-to-day workload. Option C. Implement a comprehensive system of documented policies, regular file reviews, and ongoing training tailored to Minnesota real estate laws and ethical standards. Option D. Rely solely on the agent's individual understanding and adherence to Minnesota real estate laws without direct oversight. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive system of documented policies, regular file reviews, and ongoing training tailored to Minnesota real estate laws and ethical standards. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker to balance the fiduciary duties owed to their client with the legal and ethical obligations of supervising their licensed agents. The broker must ensure compliance with Minnesota's real estate licensing laws and regulations, while fostering an environment where agents can operate effectively and ethically. Missteps can lead to disciplinary action, financial penalties, and damage to the brokerage reputation. The best approach involves the broker actively engaging in a proactive and documented supervision process. This includes establishing clear policies and procedures for agent conduct, transaction management, and client communication, and regularly reviewing these processes. The broker should conduct periodic file reviews, provide ongoing training on legal and ethical requirements specific to Minnesota real estate practice, and maintain open lines of communication for agents to seek guidance. This comprehensive oversight ensures that all transactions are handled in accordance with Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82 and the rules promulgated thereunder, protecting both the client and the brokerage. An incorrect approach would be for the broker to delegate all supervisory responsibilities to an unlicensed administrative assistant. This fails to meet the broker's statutory obligation under Minnesota law to directly supervise all licensed activities conducted under their brokerage. An unlicensed individual cannot legally perform supervisory duties requiring a real estate license, and this delegation creates a significant compliance gap, potentially leading to violations of agency law and ethical standards. Another incorrect approach is for the broker to assume that agents will independently adhere to all Minnesota real estate laws and ethical guidelines, without any direct oversight or guidance. While agents are responsible for their own conduct, the broker of record has a legal and ethical duty to supervise. This passive stance neglects the broker's fiduciary responsibility to ensure all licensed activities are conducted properly, and can result in unintentional violations due to a lack of awareness or understanding of specific Minnesota regulations. A further incorrect approach involves the broker only intervening when a client complaint arises. This reactive strategy is insufficient for effective supervision. Minnesota real estate regulations emphasize a duty of care and diligence, which necessitates proactive measures to prevent problems. Waiting for complaint means that potential violations may have already occurred, and the broker has failed to exercise reasonable supervision to prevent them. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive compliance and continuous learning. This involves understanding the specific supervisory obligations outlined in Minnesota Statutes Chapter 82, establishing robust internal policies, conducting regular training, and maintaining open communication channels. Regularly reviewing transaction files and agent practices, and seeking clarification on complex issues from legal counsel or regulatory bodies when necessary, are crucial components of responsible brokerage management. Question 16. Consider a scenario where a prospective homebuyer in Minnesota expresses a strong desire for the lowest possible initial monthly mortgage payment, indicating a concern about their current cash flow. As a licensed real estate salesperson, what is the most responsible and ethically sound approach to guiding this client through their mortgage options, ensuring compliance with Minnesota's real estate and lending regulations? Option A. Recommend an adjustable rate mortgage arm with a low introductory rate, emphasizing the immediate savings on monthly payments, without extensively detailing the potential for future payment increases or the client's ability to manage them. Option B. Suggest an interest-only mortgage, highlighting the reduced initial payments, and downplay the fact that no principal is being paid down during the initial term, and the potential for a large balloon payment or significantly higher future payments. Option C. Conduct a thorough financial needs assessment to understand the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals, and then present a balanced overview of mortgage types, fixed rate, adjustable rate, interest only, clearly explaining the risks and benefits of each, particularly concerning payment stability and future obligations, before recommending suitable options. Option D. Focus solely on identifying mortgage products that offer the absolute lowest initial monthly payment, regardless of the long-term financial implications or the client's capacity to handle potential future payment adjustments or principal repayment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough financial needs assessment to understand the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals, and then present a balanced overview of mortgage types, fixed rate, adjustable rate, interest only, clearly explaining the risks and benefits of each, particularly concerning payment stability and future obligations, before recommending suitable options. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a salesperson to balance a client's immediate financial desires with their long-term financial stability and understanding of risk. The client's focus on minimizing upfront costs, while understandable, could lead them to a mortgage product that exposes them to significant future financial strain if their circumstances change or interest rates rise. A salesperson's duty extends beyond simply facilitating a transaction. It involves providing advice that aligns with the client's best interests and ensuring they comprehend the implications of their choices, as mandated by Minnesota's real estate and lending regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly assessing the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals before recommending any mortgage product. This includes discussing the implications of different mortgage types, such as fixed-rate mortgages which offer payment stability, adjustable-rate mortgages (ARM), which may start with lower payments but carry interest rate risk, and interest-only mortgages which defer principal repayment and can lead to higher future payments or a large balloon payment. The salesperson must ensure the client understands the potential for payment increases with ARMs and the principal repayment obligations with interest-only loans, especially in the context of Minnesota's consumer protection laws that emphasize clear disclosure and preventing predatory lending. This approach prioritizes informed consent and client well-being over simply closing a deal. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending an adjustable-rate mortgage solely based on the client's desire for lower initial payments, without a comprehensive discussion of potential future payment increases and the client's ability to absorb them, fails to meet the ethical obligation of acting in the client's best interest. This could violate Minnesota statutes requiring disclosure of all material terms and risks associated with a loan product. Suggesting an interest-only mortgage without fully explaining that no principal is being paid down during the initial term, and that the client will still owe the full principal amount at the end of the term, or face significantly higher payments if it converts to a principal and interest payment, is a serious ethical lapse. This misrepresentation of the loan structure and long-term financial impact could lead to severe financial distress for the client and potential legal repercussions for the salesperson under Minnesota's consumer protection and mortgage lending laws. Focusing exclusively on the lowest possible monthly payment, without exploring the client's capacity to handle potential future payment increases or the long-term implications of deferred principal repayment, demonstrates a lack of due diligence. This transactional mindset ignores the salesperson's responsibility to ensure the client selects a mortgage product that is suitable for their overall financial health and long-term objectives, potentially leading to defaults and harm to the client's creditworthiness, which is contrary to the spirit of Minnesota's regulatory framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric approach, beginning with a detailed needs assessment. This involves active listening to understand the client's stated desires and underlying financial realities. Following this, a comparative analysis of suitable mortgage products should be presented, emphasizing the unique risks and benefits of each, particularly in relation to the client's stated preferences and assessed capacity. Transparency and clear, understandable explanations are paramount, ensuring the client can make an informed decision. If a client's stated preference appears to carry significant risk, the professional has an ethical and regulatory duty to explain those risks thoroughly and guide the client towards more suitable options, documenting all discussions and recommendations. Question 17. Upon reviewing rental applications for a property in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a salesperson is presented with several qualified candidates. The landlord has expressed a strong preference for a tenant who seems like a good fit for the neighborhood and will be a quiet, long-term resident. How should the salesperson proceed to ensure a legally compliant and ethical tenant selection process? Option A. Select the applicant who was referred by a close friend of the salesperson, assuming they will be a reliable tenant without requiring the full screening process. Option B. Develop a standardized checklist of objective criteria, including income verification, credit checks, and rental history review, and apply it consistently to all applicants, documenting the results for each. Option C. Prioritize applicants who appear to have a similar lifestyle and background to the salesperson or the current neighborhood demographic, based on personal observation. Option D. Inquire about the applicant's plans for starting a family or having children in the near future, to gauge their potential for long-term residency and noise levels. The correct answer is B. Develop a standardized checklist of objective criteria, including income verification, credit checks, and rental history review, and apply it consistently to all applicants, documenting the results for each. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate salesperson in Minnesota to balance the landlord's desire to find a reliable tenant with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices. The salesperson must navigate subjective criteria while adhering strictly to fair housing laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure the screening process is objective, consistent, and non-discriminatory. The best approach involves establishing clear, objective screening criteria in advance and applying them uniformly to all applicants. This includes verifying income, employment history, rental history, and creditworthiness through standardized methods. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with Minnesota's fair housing laws, which prohibit discrimination based on protected characteristics. By focusing on financial stability and past tenancy performance, the salesperson is assessing a tenant's ability to fulfill the lease obligations without resorting to subjective judgments or potentially discriminatory factors. This method ensures fairness and legality. An incorrect approach involves prioritizing applicants based on personal impressions or subjective factors like perceived lifestyle or family status. This is ethically problematic and legally risky, as it opens the door to unconscious bias and potential violations of fair housing regulations. Such a method lacks objectivity and can easily lead to disparate treatment of applicants, even if unintentional. Another incorrect approach involves asking applicants questions about their future intentions regarding family or children. This is a direct violation of fair housing laws, as it probes into protected characteristics and can be used as a basis for discrimination. The salesperson's role is to assess current financial and rental history, not to speculate on future life events that are irrelevant to tenancy and protected by law. Finally, an incorrect approach involves accepting an applicant solely because they are known to the salesperson or were referred by a trusted source, without conducting the same rigorous screening as other applicants. While personal connections can be valuable, they do not exempt the salesperson from the duty to apply fair and consistent screening criteria to all potential tenants. This practice can lead to accusations of favorability and potential discrimination against other applicants who may be equally or more qualified, but lack a personal connection. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of Minnesota's fair housing laws and the specific requirements for tenant screening. This framework should emphasize the development of objective, written screening criteria that are applied consistently to every applicant. Regular training on fair housing practices and consultation with legal counsel, when in doubt, are crucial components of responsible decision-making in tenant selection. Question 18. When evaluating mortgage financing options for a buyer in Minnesota, what is the most responsible and ethically sound approach for a real estate salesperson to take? Option A. Suggest that the buyer skip the pre-approval process to speed up the transaction and avoid potential delays. Option B. Recommend a specific mortgage lender that the salesperson has a strong working relationship with, as they are likely to offer competitive rates. Option C. Educate the buyer on various loan types and encourage them to consult with multiple lenders to compare offers and secure the best financing for their individual needs. Option D. Advise the buyer to focus primarily on the lowest advertised interest rate, as this will always result in the most affordable loan. The correct answer is C. Educate the buyer on various loan types and encourage them to consult with multiple lenders to compare offers and secure the best financing for their individual needs. Explanation. When evaluating real estate financing options for a client in Minnesota, a real estate salesperson faces a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of loan products and the potential for misrepresentation or steering clients towards unsuitable financing. The salesperson must navigate various loan types, understand their implications for the buyer, and ensure compliance with Minnesota's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. The core of the challenge lies in providing objective guidance that prioritizes the client's best interests over potential personal gain or ease of transaction. The best approach involves thoroughly educating the client about different financing avenues, including conventional loans, FHA loans, VA loans, and USDA loans, and explaining the general requirements and benefits of each. This includes discussing the importance of pre-approval, understanding interest rates, loan terms, and closing costs. The salesperson should then encourage the client to consult with multiple reputable mortgage lenders to compare offers and secure the most advantageous financing for their specific financial situation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the salesperson's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, promotes informed decision-making by the buyer, and adheres to Minnesota's regulations requiring licensees to be honest, truthful, and competent. It avoids steering and ensures the client is empowered to make their own informed choice. An approach that involves recommending a specific mortgage lender based on a pre-existing relationship or a referral fee is professionally unacceptable. This creates a conflict of interest and violates ethical obligations to provide unbiased advice. Minnesota law prohibits licensees from engaging in deceptive practices or misrepresenting information, and such a recommendation could be construed as steering the client, potentially leading them to a less favorable loan product. Another unacceptable approach is to solely focus on the loan amount and interest rate without discussing other critical factors like loan terms, fees, or the long-term implications of the financing. This superficial analysis fails to provide the client with a comprehensive understanding of the loan's true cost and suitability, potentially leading to financial distress for the buyer. This demonstrates a lack of competence and a failure to uphold the duty of care owed to the client. Finally, an approach that involves advising the client to avoid pre-approval to expedite the closing process is also professionally unsound. Pre-approval is a crucial step in the financing process that helps buyers understand their borrowing capacity and strengthens their offer. Discouraging this vital step can lead to failed transactions, financial disappointment for the buyer, and potential liability for the salesperson. It demonstrates a disregard for sound real estate practices and the client's financial well-being. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the client's needs and financial goals. This is followed by a comprehensive education on relevant financing options, emphasizing objective information and the importance of independent lender comparison. The salesperson's role is to facilitate informed decision-making, not to make decisions for the client or to benefit from biased recommendations. Transparency, honesty, and a commitment to the client's best interests should guide every interaction. Question 19. The analysis reveals that a landlord client in Minnesota has informed their real estate salesperson that a tenant's lease has expired, but the tenant is refusing to vacate the property. The salesperson understands that the landlord wants the tenant out as soon as possible. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the Minnesota licensed real estate salesperson to take? Option A. Advise the landlord to change the locks on the property and remove the tenant's belongings to prevent further unauthorized occupancy. Option B. Advise the landlord client to immediately consult with a qualified attorney to initiate the formal eviction process as outlined in Minnesota Statutes Chapter 504B. Option C. Inform the tenant directly that they must vacate within 48 hours or face immediate removal by the authorities, as per the salesperson's interpretation of the lease expiration. Option D. Draft a notice to vacate for the landlord to serve on the tenant. including specific legal justifications for the eviction based on the salesperson's understanding of the lease terms and Minnesota law. The correct answer is B. Advise the landlord-client to immediately consult with a qualified attorney to initiate the formal eviction process as outlined in Minnesota Statutes, Chapter 504B. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common yet complex situation in Minnesota real estate transactions involving a tenant's refusal to vacate after a lease expires, presenting a significant professional challenge for a licensed salesperson. The salesperson must navigate the legal intricacies of eviction while upholding ethical duties to both their client, the landlord, and the tenant, ensuring compliance with Minnesota statutes. The challenge lies in balancing the client's desire for swift possession with the tenant's legal rights and the salesperson's obligation to avoid engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. The best approach involves advising the landlord-client to engage legal counsel to initiate the formal eviction process as prescribed by Minnesota law. This is the correct and most professional course of action because Minnesota Statutes Chapter 504B outlines specific procedures for residential evictions, including notice requirements, court filings, and judicial orders. A licensed real estate salesperson is not authorized to provide legal advice or to directly initiate or conduct eviction proceedings. By recommending legal counsel, the salesperson ensures that the eviction is handled by a qualified professional who understands the nuances of landlord-tenant law in Minnesota, thereby protecting the landlord from potential legal repercussions due to procedural errors and respecting the tenant's due process rights. This also aligns with ethical guidelines that prohibit real estate licensees from practicing law. One incorrect approach is for the salesperson to attempt to draft a notice to vacate, or to advise the tenant on their rights and obligations regarding vacating the property. This constitutes the unauthorized practice of law, which is strictly prohibited for real estate licensees in Minnesota. Licensees are expected to have a working knowledge of landlord-tenant laws relevant to their transactions, but are not permitted to interpret or apply these laws in a manner that constitutes legal advice. Another incorrect approach is for the salesperson to physically attempt to remove the tenant or their belongings from the property, or to threaten the tenant with such actions. This is illegal and constitutes self-help eviction, which is prohibited under Minnesota statutes. Landlords must follow the legal eviction process through the courts. Any attempt to bypass this process can result in severe penalties for the landlord and potentially implicate the salesperson for aiding and abetting illegal actions. A further incorrect approach is for the salesperson to advise the landlord to simply change the locks or shut off utilities to force the tenant out. This is also a form of illegal self-help eviction under Minnesota law and can lead to significant legal liability for the landlord and ethical violations for the salesperson. The professional decision-making process in such a scenario should begin with identifying the core issue: a tenant remaining in possession beyond the lease term. The salesperson must then recognize their limitations as a real estate licensee and their ethical obligation not to engage in the unauthorized practice of law. The primary duty is to guide the client toward the appropriate legal channels. This involves clearly communicating to the landlord that the situation requires legal intervention and recommending they consult with an attorney specializing in landlord-tenant law in Minnesota. The salesperson should document this recommendation and refrain from offering any legal interpretations or strategies themselves. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a Minnesota licensed real estate salesperson to advise a client on the potential selling price of their single-family residence in a well-established suburban neighborhood. The property is a standard 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, approximately 20 years old, with no unique architectural features. The salesperson has access to recent sales data for similar homes in the immediate vicinity. Which valuation method would be most appropriate and ethically sound for providing an initial estimate of market value? Option A, the cost approach, estimating the replacement cost of the home and subtracting accrued depreciation. Option B, a comparative market analysis, CMA, based on recent sales of similar properties in the same neighborhood. Option C, the income approach, calculating the potential gross rental income and applying a capitalization rate. Option D, a combination of the income approach and the cost approach, averaging the results to determine value. The correct answer is B, a comparative market analysis, CMA, based on recent sales of similar properties in the same neighborhood. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of property valuation method to accurately advise clients and comply with Minnesota real estate licensing regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because a salesperson must select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property, balancing the client's needs with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Misapplication of a valuation method can lead to inaccurate pricing, client dissatisfaction, and potential disciplinary action from the Minnesota Department of Commerce. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis, CMA. A CMA is a method used by real estate professionals to determine the market value of a property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold in the same area. This method is directly aligned with the Minnesota Department of Commerce's expectations for real estate licensees when providing pricing advice. Minnesota Rule 8200-0300, Sup. 1, which governs advertising and representations, implicitly requires licensees to base their opinions of value on sound principles and current market data. While not explicitly mandating a CMA, it underscores the need for a data-driven, market-relevant valuation. A CMA is considered best practice because it reflects current market conditions, buyer behavior, and recent sales data, providing the most reliable estimate of what a buyer is likely willing to pay in the current market. Using the income approach would be inappropriate for a single-family residence. The income approach is primarily used for income-producing properties, such as apartment buildings or commercial spaces, where the value is derived from the potential rental income. Applying this method to a single-family home, which is typically owner-occupied, would ignore the primary drivers of value for such a property and could lead to a misleading valuation. This would violate the ethical obligation to provide competent and accurate advice. The cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property minus depreciation, is also not the best primary method for this scenario. While it can be useful for unique properties or new construction where comparable sales are scarce, it often overestimates value for older homes because it doesn't fully account for market preferences or the functional obsolescence that may have occurred. Relying solely on the cost approach without considering market comparables would fail to reflect what buyers are actually paying for similar properties in Minnesota, potentially misrepresenting the property's market value and violating the duty of care owed to the client. A professional real estate salesperson in Minnesota should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the most relevant and reliable valuation method for the specific property type and market conditions. This involves understanding the strengths and limitations of each approach, gathering accurate and current data, and applying professional judgment to arrive at a well-supported opinion of value. When advising on a single-family home, the comparative market analysis is generally the most suitable starting point, supplemented by other approaches if specific circumstances warrant.